19. Okay, we have a trifecta. Michael, Fran, and Terry. Let's go. Item 19, Terry.
Thank you, commissioners. Does she really want to do this right now? Okay. You should have received a yellow replacement for item number 19 in your packet. A requirement of SB1 is that annually the commission evaluate the effectiveness of the department in reducing deferred maintenance and improving road conditions on the state highway system, as demonstrated by the progress made towards the SB1 goals. The commission may make recommendations for improvement and may withhold future project allocations if it determines program funds are not being appropriately spent. This book item is an informational item that includes the department's report on progress made towards these goals, as well as their progress towards meeting the approved TAMP goals. Commission staff will prepare a report for your consideration at the December meeting with any findings to be included in the annual report to the legislature. Mike Johnson has prepared a presentation for this item.
But I think this is a really good news item, so let me start with some preamble things. In my role, we get audited by a number of different sources related to SB1, and one of the findings that we anticipate has to do with having the annual performance in a nice consolidated package. So you'll notice that this year we've actually produced a nice little report. This has all 19 of the performance targets that were established for asset management and the 2 additional that were added by SB1 under one cover. So the hope is that this will provide a central place for you to go back and refer to what's going on with these different metrics. Additionally, we made an attempt, and I hope you agree we were successful in trying to make the report easier to understand. We provided narrative on each one of the targets as we went through, and provided some helpful guidance among the graphs, because the graphs are one of the things that we got some feedback were confusing, because sometimes up is good and sometimes down is good. And so we've tried to make that a little bit more intuitive. For the benefit of everyone, I wanted to just run through a quick presentation to go through how and why this report comes about. So the why it comes about, it's part of our overall asset management efforts to track these things. And we report on them once a year, but we track them all the time. I mean, this is perpetual tracking almost. In fact, we produce a quarterly set of projects that we call the project book that has all the work that we expect to do in the shop for the next 10 years, forward looking. And we use that on a quarterly basis to recertify that every one of our 12 districts is meeting the performance objectives that we established, and they're doing it within a fiscally constrained budget. So every single quarter, this gets rechecked and reevaluated. This particular report is required by CTC guidelines. This was adopted as an amendment to the SHOPP guidelines shortly after the passage of SB1. That's what brings me before you every year in October to give you an update. The report, as I mentioned, brings all 19 of these metrics together in one place. We've added an appendix to this report that gives you the details of the conditions. A lot of the discussion that we just had about, well, what constitutes good, fair, poor, we've added a whole appendix for all of the metrics so you understand, well, what does good, fair, poor pavement mean? What does good, fair, poor bridges mean? And it's there as a resource for you to refer back to during the year. As far as the timing, this is the second report, so we're 20% of the way into the SB1 performance period. So it's a really good time to take stock of where we are. In terms of how we go about doing the benchmarks, it's really a four-step process, and there are two exceptions. The fixed bridge criteria, which is really more of a lagging measure, and then the LOS. So those two are kind of a different animal. But for everything else, we take the most recently available condition information that we have of the system. And this changes constantly. We apply expected deterioration rates to that existing condition, and then we counter that deterioration with project level accomplishments on a fiscal year by fiscal year basis. And so we do this 1 year at a time through this 10-year period, and it allows us to prepare for you a projection of how we see ourselves getting from where we are to where we want to be. In some cases, the inventory is changing quite a bit. Couple examples are with the transportation management system elements. They're being added to the system at an extremely rapid rate. And so when we look at how many of them we're maintaining and managing, it keeps growing every single year. So you have, in some cases, inventory growth becomes very relevant. But it's basically these steps. We apply these same four steps, whether it's pavement or bridge condition or culvert condition. It's the same steps. We produce a number of graphs, and I want to spend a little bit of time just sort of walking the commission through these graphs and how to read them. There is a gray line on every graph and a shaded area in gray. Those are the original benchmarks that I came before you and we established as a department back in 2018. And the colored line is where we are today. So we're always measuring ourselves relative to where we originally said we thought we would be. There is an arrow on the far right of the graph that indicates what direction is improving condition, okay? So this is one of those areas where we tried to be better than last year. There is also, you'll notice on the green line, there is a solid dot for the first mark, okay? And what that indicates is that is an actual measured condition, not a projection. The hollow circles points are projections going forward. So in this particular case, this is our pavement class 1 good condition metric. So we have 9 different metrics for pavement because we break it up into 3 different classes of routes. Class 1 pavement is all of the interstate routes, all of the main freight routes in the state, and Class 1 represents about half of all pavement in California. So what this chart shows is that we are doing significantly better than we thought we would be. So I mean, internally, I applaud all the districts and all of our programs because they're the ones making all this work happen. But you all, earlier today, were commenting, you're seeing this. When you drive down the freeway, you don't have to go far before you see an area with an SB1 sign under construction. Pavement is doing well in California. We're doing very well. And I think you all, as acknowledged earlier, are seeing some of that. We've also put a little legend up at the top there just in case you forget what I told you here today. But the little dotted line is the target that was established by the commission for asset management. Okay? So generically speaking, all these graphs are the same format. All of those symbols and things are exactly the same from graph to graph to graph. It's just sometimes up is improving, sometimes down is improving. Because if we reduce fair and we reduce poor, that's a good thing, and that's going down. Okay, so I'm going to break the presentation down into 2 sets as broken down in the benchmark report. The first set is the SB1 targets. So we are doing pretty awesome for pavement, I got to say. Better than I thought we'd be doing, and it's really a testament to all the work that everybody's doing within Caltrans across the state. we are doing better or equal to our projections for all classes of pavement, period. So it's great. Level of service was one of those SB1 metrics that SB1 established that when we look at it, its goal was to not lose sight of the work that's necessary to keep this new pavement that we put out there in as good a condition as we can for as long as we can. It will deteriorate, but there are things we can do to slow that deterioration. And so the level of service criteria looks at that. There was no specific definition of level of service in SB1. There is a criteria that the department had used within our maintenance program for some time. In working with commission staff, we presented that. We looked at it. We're gonna make some adjustments to the level of service. So we're working with commission staff, and we will be coming back in a future meeting with an adoption item for the commission to look at with respect to level of service. As far as fixing 500 bridges, we are on track. We're actually exceeding the pace necessary. We needed to do 50 more a year for 10 years to get to over 500. I will remind the commission that SB1 says we will do at least 500 more. And as you'll see in a minute, we actually need to do a significant amount more than 500 more in order to get to the condition targets. But as far as the fixing 500, we're on track. We're looking good there. Culverts is also looking good. We did a couple of things as a department to really amp this up, and one of them was to increase our maintenance forces going out and unplugging culverts, because a culvert's inability to convey water is one of those things that makes it poor. It doesn't function the way it's supposed to. So we're utilizing Caltrans maintenance forces. We received additional resources that are being devoted specifically to this in our districts, and we're seeing some pretty rapid returns from the crew work out there. The transportation management system elements, we're having that as a monitor. It's still falling within our uncertainty band, that shaded area, that Monte Carlo analysis that we do. But it's changed a little bit from a year ago, so we want to keep a closer eye on the TMS. But overall, it's a really good news story for SB1. The department is doing what SB1 wanted us to do. We're applying money in the right places, and we're seeing the product of that work. This is just another example, culvert. This is the culvert condition. You can see that we're currently right about the SB, or the commission adopted target of 10%, which happens to be the SB1 target. And then this is one of those examples where the improving condition is below the gray line, not above. This is the transportation management system projection. Currently, we are better than we thought we were going to be. So that's the solid dot. Our measured condition is better today than we thought. But when we look out at our project stream, we're seeing us kind of cross over our expectation and then come back down. And so this is one where, you know, if you get really technical, we're like point percentages away from the goal at the end. And so we're going to monitor this one pretty closely going forward. Some of the challenges that we've been having with TMS and some of the things we're working on is really making sure that when the projects are done, that there are very solid post-project business processes to get back in and say, yes, we did this thing. What further complicates the TMS is a lot of times these are systems of elements. So in many cases, we might have loop detectors in the pavement, and we'll have a controller on the side of the road, and we'll have a signal for a ramp meter. And these all three of these components have different lives, and they can come and go in terms of their condition over time. And some of our projects are not replacing all of them. In other words, we don't typically have to replace a signal pole, you know, but maybe once every 50 to 80 years, but we might have to replace a controller every 10 to 15. And so we typically can be replacing parts of these systems. And so we've been working through some of the nuances of how to make sure we're reporting this accurately. Okay, so now I'm shifting gears away from the SB1 targets to the commission-adopted asset management targets. So just like SB1, all the pavement classes are on track. We are below 2% poor for all pavement, so for SB1, put a check. But the commission-adopted target for Class 1 pavement, which is half the pavement, is only 1% poor. So it's more aggressive than the SB1 target. We're not quite at 1% poor for Class 1 pavement, but we are making progress as we expected to make progress, so we're saying we're on track. Bridges and tunnels, we have to take some action. And so, this is something that I felt pretty strongly that, the integrity of our whole asset management effort and our reports to you, that we be extremely transparent. We need to make some changes with our project portfolio in order to get to the targets we're after for bridges. And I'll explain in more detail why. Culverts, we're on track as mentioned, and TMS is essentially the same as SB1. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about bridges and tunnels here. Within the benchmark report for each one of these 19 items, we show a year-to-year trend in a chart that looks like this. And so what we're seeing is our good condition bridges went down, our fair conditions went up, and our poor conditions went up, which means they're all going the opposite direction of what we would want them to be doing. So we need to do something about it. And really, this is the point of asset management, is that we are monitoring this. We can see this early on. We can react to it and make the changes necessary to bring this thing home. So I wanted to bring this chart back up. All of these arrows that the commission sees on the screen should look very familiar, because this was really the cornerstone slide for 2 workshops related to project delivery. And so what this does is walk through the process that we have when we put bridge projects out in this case. What I've added to this chart is the time frames associated with each one of these steps. And these are the average time frames based on projects that have completed over the 3 previous fiscal years. So if you look at this time period from inception to the point we would take credit for our project, we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 9.5 years on average. That means half of the projects are taking longer and half are probably less. So this is really important, because when SB1 passed, we had a 10-year time window to get meaningful work done on a process that on average takes 9.5 years. Okay, so we've spent some time internally within Caltrans to look at how can we compress this timetable, what are those strategies that we can do to get this work done faster. These are some of the strategies that have been identified. First and foremost, permit streamlining under AB 1282 will address the yellow arrow that we call PA&ED. This is where we get our environmental approval. So if we have better coordination with other resourcing agencies, we can compress that time frame. The average time frame was 2.5 years, but we have some bridge projects, many of which are very familiar to the commission, that can be a decade or more to get through the environmental process. So this is an area that we're really looking forward to the product of 1282 to make a difference in the speed at which we can get environmental clearances for projects. Additionally, we need to do some more bridge work. So we've got to put more into the portfolio, and particularly we've got to put more in that gets through the point of construction completion prior to 2027. So that means we're having to look at the strategies. What can we do in those time frames? and what avenues are the most appropriate place to go through for that. One of the interesting things that came out in this meeting was looking back at this timetable. You see a 2-year time period under the PID, that's our planning effort, and then you see a 1 year for the programming and allocation. So 1/3 of the total time is being spent waiting to get it in design. And there we see some significant, virtually cost-free opportunities to streamline this process. For example, we completed planning for bridge projects for the 2020 SHOPP on June 30th of 2019. Those projects will sit idle for a year waiting for the SHOPP to become active. And in some cases, some of those bridge projects might have completed planning a year before that. So we believe by just simply changing the way we program bridge work, we can save 10 to 20% in this overall time frame, which I think is actually a huge improvement at zero cost. We're also looking at the back end of this process, when construction completes, how quickly we get the bridges re-inspected so that the reported condition that we provide to the federal government gets updated very quickly. There were some other strategies. Using design build, CMGC certainly can help compress that design construction timeframe a bit. Bridge projects, because of the environmental clearances, we need to be utilizing the delegated authority we have for long lead projects for bridges, particularly bridges over water. These are particularly problematic in getting all of our permits. In effect, almost every bridge replacement over water should be programmed as a long lead project, in my opinion, so that we can jumpstart the process of environmental prior to committing programming dollars for the construction of the project. So we are optimistic that with these strategies coming into play, that we will be able to turn this thing around. And that's kind of where we are for the bridges. Overall, I think it's a really good news story. We're making significant progress. We're doing well on all the SB1 metrics, the asset management metrics, which are a little bit higher rung on the ladder. We have a little bit of work to do there. But I think if we make these changes that we talked about and implement some of these strategies, we'll get ourselves back to a good place.
Yes, Commissioner Gilmedi.
Michael, thank you. That was a great report. On page 2, I want to go back to that. We have the CTC benchmark line. That was established before SB1, correct?
Yes, the commission established all the asset management targets in advance of SB1 passing.
So if you had to put an SB1 line in there, where would that green line be in relation to an SB1 line? Do we know that?
With respect to which asset?
I'm on pavement class 1 on page 2.
Okay. So pavement class 1, the primary distinctions between what the commission adopted and SB1 is that SB1 combined good and fair together, and they relaxed poor to 2% for class 1. So in other words, if I were to retool that metric in the commission's world, you'd say you've got to get 99% of all the pavement lane miles in good or fair, where SB1 says 98%. But we have this added distinction between good and fair. So SB1 merged them, I think, for simplicity and understanding what we would get from SB1. But here, I've been very clear to add the fair because I don't want the state of California falling into a worse first management approach. So I want to make sure we don't lose sight of that preservation. So hopefully, does that explain?
Well, sort of, I guess. I was just looking to, if there was an SB1 line there, where would that line be? Would it be between the CTC benchmark and the condition assessment in green, projected benchmark?
I'm sorry, I'm looking on page 2. I'm not tracking with what you're referring to.
On report features.
Oh,
two.
slide 2, I'm sorry.
That one.
Okay. Now it makes a lot more sense.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. So for class 1, our good is going to be a little bit higher. So that dashed line that you see,
Correct.
that is our line. The SB1 line would be a little bit lower, so we'd be doing even better.
Oh, okay, great. All right, thank you.
Other comments, questions? Michael, I have one for you.
Sure.
On the bridge corrective strategies, you
Yep.
list first with the permit streamlining. In the early meetings of that task force, talked about the number of incomplete applications we were sending over to our agency partners. That feels like something that we can correct ourselves without finishing up the work of AB 1282. Can you talk to us a little bit about that kind of progress?
Certainly, I'm not an expert in 1282, but my understanding is that that task force, their final report, I believe, is due in December, and they have established a series of checklists that can be used by Caltrans to ensure that when our package goes over to the resource agencies, it in fact has everything that they need to make a timely decision. So that's one of those steps that I think they're looking at to, to make sure there's not a bunch of back and forth with rework.
But I think in the interim time, just the early work they did to tell us something north of 50% of our applications were incomplete, right? So
I'm not familiar with the percentage, but I did hear that there is instances where that's occurring, where packages are being returned for additional information, and that's taking time. And I think they have a report that they're in the process of drafting. I think they know what these checklists are looking like. I would defer to that team as to when that gets daylighted and then how quickly we could implement that.
well, I think maybe just talk to your colleagues, because I think, we're all on the same team here,
Yeah.
and we all can start doing some of the things that were slowing us down before, if it's simply, they needed to have a phone extension or something, whatever it was. But yeah.
Yeah, I think we're certainly looking for whatever we can do to speed up the process as quickly as we can.
Okay. All right. Any other comments? Hearing none, we will move on. Okay. We're up to, what,
20.
20 now. We moved all the way to 20. Okay, perfect.
Commissioners, this is an informational item. Another requirement of SB1, it amended Streets and Highway Code to include a requirement that the department implement efficiency measures with the goal to generate at least $100 million per year in savings to invest in maintenance and rehabilitation of the state highway system. These savings shall be reported to the Commission. We have not received a copy of the efficiencies report as of today. Nabila Abi-Rashad is here to provide a presentation on the department's efficiencies report.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners, Senator Bill. My name is Nabila Abi-Rashad, and I'm the Acting Senate Bill 1 Program Manager for Caltrans. I have the pleasure of providing you with the report on Caltrans Senate Bill 1 Annual Efficiencies Report for fiscal year 18-19. As you know, Senate Bill 1 requires the department to implement efficiency measures with the goal to generate at least $100 million per year in savings to reinvest in the maintenance and rehabilitation of the state highway system. These savings are reported to the Commission in October of every year. For the 18-19 year, our goal was to generate $200 million. The department is always striving for continuous improvements, which means challenging ourselves to identify new ways to achieve our goals. The annual efficiencies report for the 18-19 fiscal year has identified 12 new efficiencies, which have been categorized as innovative tools, new technology, and process improvement efforts. For this report, we have identified, quantified, and reported 8 new efficiencies out of the 12. Value analysis and construction manager general contractor, or otherwise known as CMGC, and NEPA assignment were reported in the first annual efficiencies report. These measures are reported again in the 1819 report with new project lists. Early on, we recognized the opportunity to leverage existing measures, specifically the significant savings that we can generate from value analysis in CMGC. Therefore, we took steps forward and this past year lowered the threshold in performing value analysis studies from $50 million total project cost to $25 million. This will increase our total number of studies performed and in turn increase our opportunities to generate additional efficiencies. Senate Bill 1262 also enacted which allowed Caltrans to increase the use of CMGC. The report also includes additional ways Caltrans is seeking to be innovative and efficient. Specifically, Lean Six Sigma is a proven method to produce substantial savings by using data-driven and a focused approach. The approach is designed to pinpoint waste and inefficiencies, drive innovation, and produce results. The report has highlighted 12 Lean Six Sigma projects that are in various phases of process improvements. As a result of these efforts, we anticipate monetary savings, improved productivity, and reduction in backlogs. Pursuant of Senate Bill 1, the independent audits and investigations conducted an audit of the annual efficiencies report for the 17-18 year. The auditors tested approximately 90% of the reported value. As a result of the $133 million reported in the 17-18 year, $8.7 million should not have been included, and $1.5 million was not available for reinvestment in the maintenance and rehabilitation of the state highway system, resulting in $123 million available for investing in the maintenance and rehabilitation of our system. Caltrans successfully met their goal of generating $100 million in efficiencies for the 17-18 year. The audit report also had several recommendations which we have incorporated into the 1819 report. We have developed also a list of future opportunities and are laying out methodology and assumptions and how to quantify these savings for the 1920 fiscal year. We are also scanning other state DOTs looking for new ideas. Ultimately, Caltrans' goal is to really move the needle and look for new opportunities to be efficient and leverage existing tools, processes, and technology. The full report will be submitted to the Commission when it is finalized. This concludes my presentation. Any questions for me?
We have questions. So when do we get the report?
The report's under review with Caltrans leadership, and I'll work with CTC staff on when we can submit it. At this time, it's unknown.
Okay. And do we have a deadline that was tied to?
No, other than we were to report to the Commission in October. Yes.
But we're not going to see it by October, right? This is October.
That's correct. So what I will go back and do is work with my leadership and work with Commission staff, and then we will work on a date to submit it.
Okay.
We would hope that we would have it soon enough that we could, if need be, include comments in our annual report.
Okay. Okay. And a question I have, and it kind of goes along with Senator Bell's comments about the intent of SB1 was incremental bridge repair to show the public that their money was delivered quickly. On the savings, the NEPA CEQA delegation we were doing anyway, so can we count that?
Each year, NEPA and CEQA has new project lists, and they generate efficiencies. So even though it's a proven process, it always has a new project list every year. And as we scanned other state DOTs, they also utilize this as one of their efficiencies and claim success.
Okay. Yes. Commissioner Van Kenlenberg?
Could you clarify again? So the report was due in October.
Yes.
Is that correct?
The report was due to report to Commission in October. That's
Okay.
correct.
This is the October meeting.
That's correct.
Okay. And you said it's hung up where?
It's under review with Caltrans leadership.
Okay, so now I'm going to go to Caltrans leadership. Bob, can you enlighten us, please?
Endeavoring to get it to you as soon as possible.
Well, can we do better than this?
Okay. Senator Bell.
Well, the statute says October, okay? That's the statute. It's the law. So. It's the law. Right. Yeah. But this was also a very important part of SB1 because we wanted to show that Caltrans reform was taking place and that we were trying to consistently do things better year after year after year and add up a cumulative savings for the taxpayer, because we got so much criticism when we started our campaign, SB1 and No on 6, we got so much criticism that people, for lack of they didn't have any like specifics usually, but they would say, well, Caltrans not doing their job in an efficient manner, blah, blah, blah. I think we had this put in because we wanted to show that we wanted to show the taxpayers that we were making improvements year after year after year, and we were always trying to do our best to deliver the product. And I hope we can get this report. I like to look at it. I always look at this. This is kind of interesting to me. I'm a kind of a wonky guy, as you know. I look at these things. I had some suggestions for next year.
Okay.
We put money in SB1 for research and development. We have the universities working. I think there's got to be a better connection, just after the couple years we've had SB1, there's got to be a better connection between what those researchers are doing and those academic studies on transportation that we're funding. We're funding about $7 million a year. And I think they have to have a better connection between what they're doing and in order to help you get these $100 million target savings so they can come up with some ideas. And I know they're working on a lot of different things on project delivery. They have all kinds of exciting stuff they're doing on pavement management, putting down pavement that lasts longer, the rubberized, the recycled materials. There's all kinds of neat kind of things that they're doing. But I think there's got to be more, maybe this next year, hopefully, a connection between this work on project delivery savings and some of the research that they do, and maybe we can get them to assist us in coming up with some ideas. So I would suggest that. I'm going to talk to them about it. They're coming in to meet with me and Chair Fraser. They have to present a report to us in our committees every year. So I think if you can work with me on this to get some of this R&D kind of stuff to help you with these savings, that would be something I would recommend. Maybe Mr. Kim can help us with this. Thank you.
Yes, Secretary Kim.
I'll simply say, Commissioners, everything we can to expedite this report. We'll get it to you.
Thank you. I do, Senator Bell, I sit on that advisory committee for that, and I think it really is important. Basically, the commission received a list, and at the time we kind of said, well, we had tranches within SB1. There were certain categories and different programs. Shouldn't our research kind of have some of those program things too? So I think we have to really look at that. And I know in particular in the emission reduction, we're desperately trying to reduce emission from the freight sector and do it quicker than it would normally happen. So I think to the extent we can get some good research to help us figure out the best way to do that and the most efficient way. So I think one thing we can do is ask for a presentation, and we'll be with Dan Sperling, Commissioner. Okay, and tomorrow we have a joint meeting, so maybe we could just bring that up too and talk about, really, I think what we're looking for is really applied practical research that we can put to work really quickly to help us with this. I think that was the intent of the research dollars there. So yes, so Carl, Commissioner Gardino?
Chair Inman, thank you. Nabila, thank you for joining us today and for your work on SB1 implementation.
Thank you.
I am both an oral and a visual learner, and to be the best partner with Caltrans as we can be, as we all deliver SB1 and what we've promised the voters and taxpayers in California. And when SB1's language said report in October, I'm not sure if it said oral report, written report, or if it was vague on that point. But with the permission of the chair, I think we're all hearing from my colleagues and I that having that report in writing for our October meeting each year would benefit us all greatly and would show the public how seriously we're all taking this, as we know that you and the department are. So through the chair, can we make it clear that we would like it in writing each October in time for our October meeting?
Do you want to do a motion?
I know this is an information.
So we
The
can't.
item is information, but does
We
that
can direct-
preclude us from a vote of an expectation that this be in writing each October in time
I think if
for our
it's
October
information,
meeting?
we can't take an action. But you get the gist of it, and the king of charts just showed
Sure.
up, which is really cool.
If I can interject into the conversation, the legislation does not specify that we come to you in October. It specifies that we report to the commission. We chose October as a reasonable timeline during our first reports. COMEGC at the time chose October as the reasonable time frame to report on what happened last year and how we're doing this year. So October is our chosen date to come and report to you, and certainly we'll take direction to report to you in writing in October as part of your guidelines.
Visuals.
But the law itself does not require October.
Okay. Oh, we're getting a frown over here, but we'll.
They told us
We're
it was
good.
October, so
Okay.
Yeah, October is our traditional time for reporting, yes.
that's what they said.
Director Branson, did you?
Commissioners and Senator Bell, I would just want to add to this report is very important to the commission as we, move forward on evaluating Caltrans's performance as is required in Senate Bill 1 for the commission's purposes of reporting back to the legislature. So just like Caltrans has reporting requirements to the legislature, the commission does too. And so we as staff are greatly looking forward to your report. And thankful to hear that there's such wonderful news in that report. So anyways, with that, it is an info item. So just commissioners know that we will get you this report as quickly as we can. We'll work with Caltrans and we'll get it sent to you.
Thank you. And Secretary Kim has given us his word on that, so we're good. Okay, let's move on to item 21, please. This is an information item. Paul?
Commissioners, tab 21 is an information item. LA Metro has submitted an application for approval of a toll facility on Interstate 105 in Los Angeles County. Philbert Wong from LA Metro will provide an overview of the project.
Good morning. I'm Philbert Wong. I'm the project manager from LA Metro. Thank you, Chair Inman, Senator Beal, Secretary Kim, and commissioners for the opportunity to present our project and for consideration for a tolling authority on the 105 freeway. With me this morning is Shahrazad Amiri, who is the Executive Director of Congestion Reduction with Metro, as well as Mark Linsenmeyer, who is the Deputy Executive Director of Congestion Reduction at Metro. I have a brief presentation for you on our project. Just some background before I get into the 105. Metro has been operating express lanes since November of 2012 on the 110. We opened the 10 express lanes in February of 2013, so we've been operating express lanes for almost 7 years now. The express lanes originally were developed in partnership with Federal Highways, Caltrans, and the Highway Patrol. And as a result of the success of the 10 and the 110, the Metro Board and subsequently the California Legislature approved tolling on these freeways in perpetuity. As a result of the success of the 10 and the 110, the Metro Board directed staff to prepare a Los Angeles County Express Lane Strategic Plan that looked at other freeways in the corridor that might benefit for conversion to express lanes. And as a result of that analysis, the 105 was identified as a Tier 1 or near-term project. This project was also in the SCAG 2016 Regional Transportation Plan, and we anticipate that this project will also be in the 2020 RTP SCS. Caltrans completed the project initiation document for this freeway in September of 2015. Additionally, this project is receiving $175 million in Measure M local sales tax funding that was passed in November of 2016. Finally, this project is included in Metro's 28 by 28 initiative, which is to complete 28 projects prior to the 2028 Olympics. This is our corridor. The 105 spans about 16 miles, encompasses 9 cities. On the western end of the corridor, we have LAX. In the center of the corridor, the blue line is the 110 express lanes, and you see that red square there. We currently have an HOV direct connector that connects the 105 HOV lanes to the 110 express lanes. So implementation of express lanes on the 105 would provide a direct connection on the 105 to downtown Los Angeles via the 110 express lanes. This corridor also intersects with major interstate highways. On the western end, we have the 405. In the center is the 110, and towards the eastern end of the corridors, we have the 710 and 605 freeways. Project need, there is an existing HOV lane on the 105. It is currently degraded as defined by federal guidelines and identified as Caltrans as degraded. Currently can take about 36 minutes to travel in that HOV lane compared to 15 minutes with no congestion. So that's a speed of around 26 to 27 miles per hour on average. In the general purpose lanes, the speeds are below 25 miles per hour during peak periods. And so it can take 43 minutes compared to 15 minutes with no congestion. In addition, this corridor is important for freight movement. As I mentioned earlier, we have LAX on the western end of the corridor that handles a significant amount of air cargo. And on the eastern end of the corridor, there are more trucks that are related to the ports of LA and Long Beach. So we have 2 build alternatives that we're looking at in addition to the no build condition. Alternative 1 is the current condition of the 105. We have 3 general purpose lanes, aux lane and an existing HOV lane, standard left and right shoulders, about 10 feet, standard general purpose lanes, 12 feet, HOV lane also at 12 feet. Alternative 2 would convert the existing express lane, existing HOV lane into an express lane. We would also add toll equipment, signage, and pavement markings, but the rest of the freeway would remain as it is today. Alternative 3 would restripe the lanes to add a second express lane in each direction. We would narrow the left shoulder from 10 feet down to 4 feet. We would reduce lane widths from 12 to 11 feet, reduce the buffer width between the express lanes and the GP lanes to 2 feet, add in express lanes, toll equipment, signage, and pavement markings. And there is the potential for limited right-of-way for this alternative. In terms of facility design, we would separate the general purpose lanes from the express lanes by the double white stripe buffer. We may put in channelizers. That's something that we're doing now on the 10 and the 110 express lanes. They would be limited ingress egress. We would also look to add weave lanes. In the lower photo, you can see kind of towards the right of the photo, we have 2 express lanes. And to the right of that is what looks like a 3rd lane, and so that's a weave lane that facilitates movement into and out of the express lanes. And so we would add those in at all of the ingress, or most of the ingress-egress locations for this project. Operationally, because we have the 10 and the 110 express lanes, we would operate the 105 in a similar manner for consistency to the 10 and the 110. We would operate this facility 24/7. We would use dynamic pricing, so tolls would vary based on congestion and can refresh as often as every 5 minutes. We would offer clean air vehicles a 15% discount. We would enhance transit in the corridor. That's something that we currently do on the 10 and the 110, where we use net toll revenues to increase transit service on the corridor. We would also carry over the low-income assistance plan, carpool loyalty, and transit rewards programs, and our occupancy policy is to be determined. In addition, Caltrans and FHW and CHP have also been involved in the development of this project. Caltrans is preparing and improving the environmental document. Going forward, they will be reviewing and approving all design and operational plans, and they also perform general maintenance as they do currently on the 10 and the 110. We currently contract with CHP for enforcement on the 10 and the 110, and we would carry that forward to the 105. And FHWA is involved with our regular project development team and ConOps meetings, and they've also identified this project as a project of division interest. In terms of the mobility metrics, this is a daily person throughput comparing the no-build HOV2, it's the second from the left, comparing that to the single express lane conversion, alternative 2 to the right of that, and to the far right is alternative 3, the dual express lanes in each direction. Our analysis would assume that if we were to simply convert the existing HOV lane into an express lane, we would need to increase the occupancy requirement to 3+. And so as a result, we would see a decrease of about 3% overall in the corridor in alternative 2, but we would see about a 3% increase in person throughput in alternative 3. We would see, in terms of vehicle hours of delay, we would see an increase of about 10% vehicle hours of delay in the corridor in alternative 2, but we would see about a 30% decrease in alternative 3. So we would see an increase in passenger throughput as well as a significant reduction in delay with alternative 3. This is our funding plan. Our current cost estimate is around $520 million, including project development, construction costs. We also have a breakdown of our current funding as well as anticipated or toll revenue-backed obligations. So we're looking at a combination of various funding sources. Not shown here, but also important to note, is that we have $175 million from Measure M local sales taxes for this project that are not shown here. And so those funds would be used for project development as well as repayment of any toll revenue-backed obligations that we may need. So in conclusion, we have conducted a significant amount of outreach. We've conducted 75 meetings to date, including scoping meetings, meetings with stakeholders, business roundtables, community roundtable meetings. In our schedule, we are looking to release the draft environmental document in January of 2020 and have a final EIR in September of 2020. And project completion could be as early as March 2025. So I'll stop there and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Okay, do we have questions? No questions. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Commissioner Norton.
We really enjoyed being at the hearing on this item earlier this month. And just last week, one of the questions that I was wondering after a lot of the input was whether or not in future phases of this program, you'd be looking at flyovers like you do have with the 110 and the 105, so that because the transition from the express lanes to the 405 will be tricky without that.
Yeah, as not a part of this project, but as a part of the 605 corridor improvement project, they will be environmentally clearing direct connectors from the 105 to the 605, as well as one movement from the 10 to the 605. So yes, we recognize that that weaving and merging can cause a lot of delay, and those would be very beneficial to the system, but unfortunately they're also unfunded. So we would have to find some way to fund those projects.
But on the 405, would you be considering, as part of the discussion, because that people have come back to me specifically on, is that a potential because it's going to affect the likelihood of support for one lane versus two lane options with the 405, just because that's such a interesting congested corridor?
That's something that we can look at in the future. It's a very constrained area, as you know. We have LAX right there, and so there's a lot of conflicting, but it's something we can look at, yes.
Thank you.
Looks like Shirazad's dying to come up to the podium.
Good morning, all, or perhaps afternoon at this point. Good to see you all. Yes, Commissioner Norton, we will take a look, but as Philbert noted, there's always right-of-way issues and, quite frankly, cost issues, especially with flyovers, structures that have to go over other structures. But yeah, that would be, we like to do whatever we can to make the express lanes in the entire corridor mobility improve over time. So that's something we will be looking at, but not as part of the 105. Thank you.
Commissioner Dunn.
You may just also want to double check and look at the lessons learned on the 241, 91, and the flyover connections into the express lanes from a toll road into express.
Or lack thereof.
Well, I do believe that there's some good news to share there, that something like 4 transportation agencies, 5 agencies, including Caltrans, just got together and came up with some creative solutions.
Okay.
But there's some very good lessons learned, and it was a huge issue for the business community between Inland Empire and Orange County. So I know there are constraints with, right-of-ways and the like, but do not let that go too long. Word to the wise.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I mean, I would agree, being one of those that tried to get my money back from the 241 when I couldn't get off of the 241, so therefore I had no real value from being on the 241. I think for our public, it's really their mobility journey that we all collectively want to solve. So whatever we can do, and it may be some of those channelizers will help to get those lane crowders to get in line like they're supposed to. So, yeah, I think we really do need to be sensitive to, it's one thing to offer a value proposition, but if I'm just going to wait down there, my net sum game doesn't feel so good because I really didn't make it. Yeah. So, okay. Commissioner Burke, no? You thinking? No? You're good? Okay, we're going to... Okay, we're gone. Okay, now we're going to move to item 22.
Commissioners, tab 22 is an action item to approve LA Metro's application for the toll facility on Interstate 105. The approval is being sought pursuant to AB 194 of 2015, which authorized the Commission to approve toll facilities in California. The legislation requires the Commission to find that the toll facility application meets 6 minimum criteria, including that the project will improve corridor performance and has a complete funding plan. In addition, the Commission adopted toll facility application guidelines in 2016 that request applicants to provide additional information, such as on public outreach. Commission staff have reviewed LA Metro's application and find that it meets the required criteria. The staff report documents this for each criterion, which were also presented in LA Metro's presentation. The staff report also includes a transcript from the public comment hearing held on September 25th and copies of comments received through email. Commission staff recommend you approve the application and the attached resolution. And before I close my remarks, I just wanted to draw your attention to 2 provisions in the resolution. First, the resolution states that per the Commission's guidelines, LA Metro is expected to request the Commission's approval for any substantial changes to the project, which is important in this case since the project is not yet through the environmental phase. And second, the resolution states that by approving the application for tolling authority, the Commission is not committing to approve any future applications for funding for the project.
We have a motion by Commissioner Alvarado, a second by Commissioner Burke. Is there discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Abstaining? That motion carries. Okay, now we're going to move on to item 23. John?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Item 23 is an action item to adopt the Prop 1B Local Bridge Seismic Retrofit Account Guidelines. As you know, we've been working on revisions to these guidelines to help promote completion of the remaining projects that are on the list. In May, the draft guidelines, or not in May, in August, we brought the draft guidelines to you guys. And then since then, on September 9th, they were sent to the legislature as required by statute. We've received no comments back from the legislature. And so staff is recommending your approval of the guidelines at this time.
Okay, we had a motion by Commissioner Tavoloni, a second by Commissioner Gometti. Is there discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Abstaining? That motion carries. Now we'll go to item 24. Teresa.
Commissioners, item 24 is an information item. On September 13th, 2019, the California State Transportation Agency released the draft guidelines for the 2020 Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program. The guidelines will guide the selection of projects and the management of the 2020 program. The Commission's responsibility on this program is to allocate the funds to individual projects. The public comment period ends October 15th. Chad Edison, Deputy Director for the Transportation Agency, will give you an overview of the draft guidelines.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioners, and Senator. Appreciate being here today. The Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program is established to increase ridership, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, improve integration among rail and transit systems, and improve safety throughout the state. And with nearly every project providing measurable benefits to priority populations. Since 2015, TIRCP has awarded $5.3 billion to 56 transformative projects around the state, supporting about $23 billion in transit and rail project development when counting the matching funds provided by other state, federal, and local sources. In a number of significant cases, TIRCP funding has helped lock down the final federal funding needed for key projects, such as the Orange County Streetcar, the BART Silicon Valley Extension, BART Core Capacity, and the Smart Larkspur Extension. Other projects that you see actively underway here in the Central Valley include the ACE Extension to Modesto series in Merced, as well as to Sacramento, the San Joaquin expansion of service to Fresno and Bakersfield. Next week, there will be one of the projects you're going to be allocating today, later in the meeting, is supporting the addition of a 14th round trip train between a 13th round trip train between Los Angeles and San Diego, through an access agreement with North County Transit District as we expand service on that end of the corridor. Finally, there are many zero-emission vehicles that are being deployed throughout the state on services. Many of those have already gone through procurements based on past allocations here at the CTC. These include major expansions of the LADOT Dash service, the Long Beach Transit Services, Big Blue Bus in Santa Monica, and in Anaheim, a number of expansions on the Anaheim Transportation Network. We are in the midst of launching our fourth funding cycle, which includes $2.5 billion in cap and trade auction proceeds in SB1 funding between fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 25. Much of that funding was programmed for project awards in 2018. However, there is at least $400 million in capacity for new projects that will need funding allocated during the 5-year period. We will be conducting 2 workshops on our guidelines next week, the first in Los Angeles on October 14th, and the second in Oakland on October 15th. Following the closeout of our comment period on the 15th, we plan to shortly thereafter issue our call for projects and final guidelines, currently scheduled for October 18th. Our draft 2020 guidelines are built on past program guidelines. The majority of the clarifications and changes are designed to provide more information on details to be addressed in applications related to project scope and demonstrated benefits. These additional details will support the project evaluation process and ensure statutory program goals are achieved. We welcome feedback on how best to achieve these goals. The updates to the guidelines focus on a few key areas, primarily in the areas of providing more guidance on how to demonstrate maximum project benefits in the areas of network integration, and also in the area of showing how high-quality transit projects can create attractive environments for focused housing and jobs growth, and vice versa, how the presence of housing and employment centers create an environment that encourages greater transit use. We also provide additional options for demonstrating benefits to priority populations and some more guidance on that. Over the last 5 years, communities and legislators from across California have clearly supported investment in transit and rail in order to improve the options available for travel in California. We look forward to receiving project applications in mid-January and awarding funds to our 4th round of projects by April 1st of 2020, as called for in SB 9. Thank you very much for your time. I'd welcome any questions.
Yes, Commissioner Van Konijnenbos.
Chad, you started off with a figure that, since, and I want to make sure I heard you correctly. So since 2017, 5.3 billion?
Since 2015, 5.3 billion, yes.
And could you break out how much of that has been spent on rail and how much has been spent on like bus and vehicle acquisition?
I can't speak to the exact breakdown right here, although I'd be glad to get that information.
Could you get that to staff so they could get that to me?
Of course. The bus and vehicle acquisition that is in our program is always tied to increasing service, and so it is something where vehicles are being purchased. It's a part of a package to add services and increase ridership.
But it sounds like over $1 billion a year is being invested in those in this sector, correct?
It's about $500 million. It was lower when it was just
in 5.3 billion. Over 4 years.
Our program looks forward, so we do 5 years into the future, and so and then we also have some projects that had longer construction timelines. So we awarded SB 9 called for us to set up a 5-year program of projects 2 years ago, and that looked into the future with the funds that were expected. That's why the last round was so large, was because we were establishing our 5-year program for the first time. So far, a little over $2 billion has come in so far against those $5.3 billion of commitments. And the funding that flows in at a rate of about $500 to $600 million a year is what is providing the funding for those future allocations. So our program does a fund estimate, kind of 5 years at a time, looks out into the future, and then on the basis of that, every 2 years we add additional awards. And to the extent that money comes in faster in the years that are early in our program, that opens up capacity for new, smaller projects that might show up in those first couple of years as we start a new programming cycle. The really big commitments, a lot of the construction allocations to large projects are generally backloaded because agencies that win the awards take a couple of years to get them ready for delivery. So that's kind of the balance of some smaller projects that have kind of short-term, quick delivery. A lot of those are the projects that might buy new buses or expand service in a new corridor at the local transit agency level. And then a lot of the longer fixed guideway projects, the light rail systems of Metro or in LA, or the intercity rail projects that rely on capital investments in freight railroad corridors. Some of those take longer to deliver and are assuming, and we will often assign the cash based on the years in which they're going to be looking for construction dollars, and thus meter the money so that more projects can move forward at once.
Thank you.
We have other questions? I have one for you. In terms of the transit and our journey to alternative fuels, we had a workshop with our transit agencies, concern number one with ridership. So obviously, we all collectively have a huge issue with making investments and then people aren't riding. So how do you all, number one, follow up to make sure that our ridership really is meeting the projection, and what recourse do we have if it doesn't? And then the second question was related to the infrastructure. So we've had other transit agencies that have really been pioneers in leading this journey. They can't get their infrastructure in, or they can't afford their infrastructure in and stuff. So how coordinated and integrated is the whole package to make sure that we're not buying vehicles that really can't do the duty cycles to get the ridership we need if they don't have their power? So they're all required to have a plan, I believe, by 2020. Yes. I think every transit agency has to have their journey, file their flight plan, so to speak, on that journey. So how integrated is that, Jen?
Well, we have many conversations in between cycles with agencies trying to help them align to be able to receive program resources. And so as we hear the very issues you just raised, Chairman Inman, we hear these all the time and are part of how we engage with the agencies to deliver the projects. So as they come in for application, they will often identify their intended type of vehicle. Might be a battery electric bus. During the project development process, some of them are finding that there might be other solutions that are better for their needs, and we work with them on that. Other agencies find ways to both increase service and replace all of the existing buses on a route. That is a way of helping them towards those plans that require them getting to 2030 procurement of zero-emission vehicles, plus also expanding the service on that route. So we kind of work with each agency to see where we can be most helpful. But this is part of why we do the consultations during the application cycle, and also why we have many meetings in between funding cycles.
But should that be part of the guideline process or something? And not to pick on Footle Transit. We love Footle Transit. They were the first ones out. But at one point, they had 14 shiny new buses not in service for north of a year, I believe. So to me, somehow we collectively, and they got funding from a lot of sources, that wasn't good because our buses are hanging out and not working. So I think earlier in the discussion, and maybe it goes in your guidelines, and then lastly to the process of the guidelines, we have an ITIP hearing next Tuesday on the 15th, and we also, you mentioned you're having a hearing on the 15th. So one's in the Bay Area and one's in Southern California. So could we, we're talking about really having this be an inclusionary process. So I think that's a little bit of a challenge for people to really be able to participate.
Well, we do have a ITIP, the day before the ITIP hearing, we have our Los Angeles hearing. So we have a hearing on these guidelines the day before. Is that?
So those two will work together, but if at the same time that we're having the ITIP, there's also for the northern partners. So I don't know, it just seems like we ought to smooth out our schedule so that people, if they wanted to go, not have two things on the same day. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Bobby says we gotta go, so. That information item there anymore? Okay.
Thank you.
All right, with that, we're going to go to lunch. So how about that? Is that where you were hoping to go, Commissioner Alvarado? Okay. All of you, call Uber Eats real fast because we're only going to take a half hour. So we'll see you.